So if you were a kid, the chances are that someone said to you at some point, life's just not fair. You're probably complaining about some injustice you'd experienced, and some older, wiser person gave you a knowing look and then uttered an undeniable truth. Life's not fair. It's a pretty depressing admission when you stop and think about it. And we're constantly in danger of just cynically accepting the fact that the world is a world of injustice and living with it so long as it doesn't affect us too much. I always think it's kind of interesting that we have such an instinctive sense of justice and injustice, of right and wrong. I mean, sometimes that sense can be distorted, it can be pretty egocentric, it can be inconsistent, but it's always there, even in the youngest of children. It's not fair. It's a cry we never really grow out of. And whether people believe in God or not, I think everyone has a sense of right and wrong. I think that's why we love detective films. At the end of a detective movie, there's always a neat and tidy moment of justice. Somebody did something wrong, they've been found out, the evidence has been gathered, and justice is done. The truth comes to light. And the closing scene usually has the criminal being gently encouraged into the back of a police car. Generally, even they have accepted their fate and they bow to the inevitability of justice. Except, of course, it's not like that in the real world, is it? In the real world, there's a kind of systemic injustice. We all know people who've got away with things. And often we're a little bit jealous, a bit resentful. Sometimes we might even be impressed at their audacity. And sometimes we're tempted to play the system ourselves. After all, sometimes it does seem like everybody's getting away with something. Everyone's on the take. Well, again, the Bible's not naive about the world that we live in. There's a breathtaking clarity that actually leaves us stunned sometimes in the way that it exposes injustice and rages against it. And we see it here in Ecclesiastes 3. As Solomon lays out his act of repentance for us, the question of justice is looming large in his thinking. And remember, Solomon was king, which means that in the ancient life of the church, justice was his responsibility. And if you remember early on in his reign, wisdom was supposed to be about establishing and enacting justice. And in those early days, he was so keenly aware of the God of justice that actually he did demonstrate insight and wisdom. He did ensure justice was done, often in a way that went far beyond what others thought was possible. But now, looking back on the ruins of a life lived under the sun, lived within the confines of this age, Solomon is facing up to his failure. What does he say? I saw something else under the sun. In the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of justice, wickedness was there. And it makes you laugh, doesn't it, when people say, oh, the Bible isn't relevant, it doesn't speak to today's world. I'm like, really? Have you ever read it? I mean, for millions of people around the world, you could not sum up their experience of life more perfectly than Solomon just has. For millions of people, their life has been defined by the question of injustice, usually an injustice that they've suffered. And for some people, this moment, more than anything else we've looked at in the book of Ecclesiastes, this moment drives home the question of futility and meaninglessness like nothing else. Some of us have suffered huge injustice. This isn't just an abstract question. It's not a theoretical issue. It's deeply personal and often a very painful and costly thing for us to confront. And the thing about it all is that so often people do seem to get away with it. At least they get away with it if we are just looking at life as it is under the sun. But if people do get away with it, then how can anything have any meaning really? Except, of course, Solomon's point is that no one gets away with it really. I mean, it's as disturbing an observation as it is reassuring. You hear his words, God will bring into judgment both the righteous and the wicked. For there will be a time for every activity and a time to judge every deed. Every deed. And in the final analysis, no one gets away with it. No one. You see, we're so quick to point the finger at others. It's always the others who get away with it, who seem to benefit from injustice. But if we could be as honest with ourselves as Solomon is being, then we might begin to realize that actually we may not only be victims, that we've also been perpetrators. You know, there are definitely people who we want to see facing justice. It's just that on reflection, we're not one of them. When someone hurts us, we want justice. When we hurt someone else, that's different. Then we want mercy. And this might answer the lurking question of why, if God is going to bring every action into judgment, why doesn't he intervene now in a more direct and obvious way? Why doesn't he stop injustice happening in the first place? Why doesn't he come and bring his justice? Well, it might just be that if he did, none of us would make it out alive. We'll come back and look at this question of justice and injustice again in our next session.